Okay, so this is the way we're going to go. First, the workstream lead from navigation workstream is going to come up and present what they learned in the last 3 days. Then it's going Dr. Pedro Del Nido from Boston Children's Hospital. Then next step is going to be Dr. Chester Ko from reimbursement workstream. Then it's going to be Dr. Jonathan Davis from hospital criteria workstream. Then Patrick Brennan from the finance workstream, and then finally Eric Chan from the regulatory workstream. So this is the order which we are going to go. And Pedro, you are up next.
Thank you, Kawalji. So our workshop was a navigation workshop, and we had 4 main questions that we wanted to address. The first one was, what is the role of SHIP? And I think we had a very good discussion. I think we tried to convey our initial thinking about SHIP being a facilitator of devices to advance through clinical evaluation and eventually regulatory approval and commercialization success. In that sense, I think what we received a number of questions regarding what stage can a device be when it enters, what are the services that it provides, what are the value adds, and I think it became fairly clear that by having both a system of hospitals that are qualified to conduct clinical trials on pediatric devices, data generation, access to patients, timely execution of contracts, single IRBs, all of these are significant value adds for a clinical evaluation of a device for the purposes of advancing it through not only the regulatory process, but I think we also emphasize the fact that it is for evidence for reimbursement, which is a critical component of commercial success. We also pointed out, and I think in the discussion it became clear, the difference between SHIP and the rest of the ecosystems, such as the Pediatric Device Consortium, where the goal there is to bring early concepts that are still in the early development phase, perhaps in the early prototype or maybe even an advanced prototype. I think the PDCs have done a tremendous job in advancing those early concepts. The SHIP, though, is aimed at a very different need, though, and that is for devices that really require clinical evidence in order to get into the commercialization and market. And that's a different group of devices, and they tend to be more class 2, class 3. They tend to be high risk and also potentially high impact. So I think it'd be in the general comments were that I think there was an agreement that there was a very big need for this type of organization, for this type of network. We started to bore down in the specifics of the process of what does it mean to board, who should be admitted, and in the discussion, I think it became clear that it had to be number one, the major criteria. It had to be a medical device, and it had to be designed, and the goal would be implemented in children. That was the fundamental criteria. Above and beyond that, it had to be fairly advanced to the point where it would actually benefit from the services that SHIP offered. So SHIP offered the ability to strategize about how the regulatory pathway might fit best, strategize about commercialization and how best to generate evidence for successful reimbursement and successful commercialization. In addition to that, if there were pre-clinical data that was required in order to be able to submit an IDE, the device had to be really ready, and the inventors had to be really ready to begin their interactions with FDA. And so this is in the area of preclinical testing. I think we were looking for, and I think the general discussion revolved around devices that were fairly advanced. What did it mean to actually navigate through SHIP? There were several components of SHIP that would be of value to devices at different stages. Either it's some preclinical data gathering and preparation for a submission for IDE, whether it's the actual conduct of the clinical trial, or in some cases, devices that are already approved but are looking for additional indications, or as a part of a combination of the regulatory strategy, combining pre-approval evidence generation as well as post-approval evidence generation as part of the regulatory process. Finally, what does success look like? And here I think we try to emphasize the fact that it is important to demonstrate that, in fact, SHIP is providing a value, whether it's from the standpoint of the stakeholders in the regulatory process. I think the government regulators would like would consider a success seeing more devices that are really ready for entering the clinical evaluation process. From the standpoint of the reimbursement, I think the community, the reimbursable community, whether it's private or public, are looking for devices that are actually going to save the cost for patients and decrease the number of hospitalizations or the number of interventions. I think that would be considered a success. And obviously, to the inventors, success is obtaining the evidence that they need in order to make a decision. Sometimes that evidence is that the device doesn't work, and obtaining that in a rapid fashion and failing early, it can be considered a success. And so this was part of the discussion. I think it was a very good point that was also made. And at the end, we must not forget that the real benefactors, the beneficiaries of this effort are going to be the patients, going to be the children. I think they are probably the major stakeholders in this. And success to them means having access to technology that currently they do not have access to, or that they have access to jerry-rigged devices that are adapted for pediatrics but were never designed and never meant for pediatric applications. So overall, I think we addressed all four questions. I think we came up with a general consensus that there is a role for SHIP, that SHIP does provide significant value in many aspects of the development process, and it's aimed primarily at the devices that are needing clinical evaluation prior to going into the market.
This is Chester. I want to say, on behalf of the reimbursement workstream, really a thank you to the co-lead, Gordon Schatz, as well as to the workstream members who spent countless hours. Really, our workstream has come up with several recommendations or lessons learned from the past year of discussions, as well as the workshop discussions, and thank you to the attendees for providing your feedback. We found that some of the key lessons learned are, number one, we understand that the importance of speed and acceleration at all steps, but that includes reimbursement, and that's really to overcome the challenges of pediatric device development, which with its smaller population, smaller market. And that may mean coordination with regulatory and FDA breakthrough designations as a priority. We recognize also that clinical outcomes data and health economics data that's needed for reimbursement may differ from that is needed for FDA approval processes. Another lesson learned, we know that there is an opportunity to fill a high priority clinical need for the small population and this niche market, and really which is a underfunded market. There really needs to be a sharp focus on increasing payment to hospitals for early development and clinical use of these innovative devices. We know that Medicaid must play a large role, but if it does not have sufficient funding, a parallel effort with private payers would be useful. And we've described two types of efforts, a top-down or federal approach, as well as a bottom-up, a state approach, especially with the state Medicaid programs and their medical directors, as really should be the focus of the efforts. We also understand and reemphasize the importance of other funding sources that do apply to pediatrics and especially pediatric devices. And that's really with the children's hospitals as well as philanthropy. And then also that SHIP-MD should be looking at both short-term and long-term goals and solutions. Long-terms, of course, being acts of Congress or advocacy to hopefully lead to positive changes, but that will take time. But we also know that there may be some shorter-term solutions, such as a reimbursement educational guidance program. As we all know that reimbursement can be quite complex with multiple decision makers, and it would be helpful to innovators to know how to better navigate that. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to John Davis for the hospital criteria.
Thanks so much, Chester. I really have appreciated Pedro's and your discussion. Now we finally get to a medical doctor after hearing from two surgeons. I want to thank Kalali Eskadanian, who is my co-chair, and the members of the hospital workstream group that really ended up spending a lot of time on this. We had a lot of good questions in the two sessions that we had. They were very productive. I don't know that we have all the answers yet, but we've really made a huge amount of progress. Really, the main take-home message is that we really want to create a safe environment for medical device development for children, and we really want to emphasize the word safe. We think that we can do high-quality, highly ethical, safe device-based research in the ShipMD hospital infrastructure. We want these hospitals to have a breadth and depth of infrastructure, experience, and support. We really want them to have a wide array of patients. We know we're dealing with children with rare diseases, and so no one hospital may have enough patients to be able to address the needs of a sponsor in a clinical trial. We think the hub and the spoke model is really the best way to go, where the hub may be potentially a children's hospital, but the need for the spokes are critically important. We recognize that not all children are cared for in children's hospitals. For instance, newborns, the majority of newborns in the United States are cared for at hospitals outside of children's hospitals. They're only getting patients with really most significant surgical and medical disease processes. We really need the support of our hospital administrators. And if you haven't seen it today, Kurt Newman, who was one of our first speakers from Children's National, he's the CEO. I'm honored to be the chair of the Scientific Advisory Board at Children's National to oversee their clinical research enterprise. And he wrote an exceptionally good article on the need for pediatric device development, mentioning SHIP and our approach prominently in it, so everyone can look that up in Stat News. We want to create a dynamic, adaptive, and sustainable. And that word sustainable, and Chester really discussed that in detail, how we're going to reimburse for this program. But we want to have a national evidence generation infrastructure for pediatric device development. We want to do it faster, cheaper, and better. Remember those three words. We want to streamline clinical trial processes at all aspects, single contracting, single IRB models, FDA liaisons, site champions, a variety of ways to move through those bottlenecks and make the processes work better. We want the potential for enterprise-wide electronic health records, real-world evidence, data management systems, and we really see ShipMD as the coordinating unit, really the go-to for sponsors, and those can be companies, small and large, universities. We have an engineering school at Tufts. They often bring devices to me for my thoughts and discussion. Think of that on a large consortium that is ready to go and to participate in these types of trials. And we really think there's going to be economies of scale when we do this. We're going to streamline and reduce the costs of conducting these studies. We're going to shorten the timelines for you to do this. it's going to be a classic win-win, and it's really a public-private partnership that is designed to streamline efforts, reduce costs, narrow timelines, and ultimately to bring products to our children. We really have, and despite a significant amount of legislation passed, we really haven't seen enough of an uptick for device development for children. Now, I just had a set of 23-week triplets who weighed approximately 450 grams each, who will spend the next 3 or 4 months of their life in my NICU, hopefully, if we're lucky. And they're going to have a tremendous amount of need for medical devices. We just don't have the kinds of devices we need to be able to care for these children. We need to do better. We must do better. We can only do this if all the key stakeholders participate in the process. Part of the reason we're here is no one organization can do this on their own. And I really do thank the folks from Critical Path Institute, especially Kim Waljeet and Klaus and Jeff and others, because you've really helped catalyze this process by bringing this consortium together. No one person's vision, approach can make a difference. It has to be all of us working together in concert. So I think I'll stop there. We can get into it in more detail, but I'm going to turn it over to Patrick Brennan from AdvaMed to talk about the finance work stream.
Thank you, John. Appreciate that. And I'd also like to thank my colleague Chris Lee and all of our fellow members of the work stream and the broader coordinating committee and executive committee here for ShipMD, and certainly appreciate the work that the team at CPAP have done to bring us to this point. So I'll review some of the charter questions for the finance work stream just to level set there and recap some of our thinking around this. We're really looking at what an effective organizing construct and to design and implement SHIP would be. And we've laid out the 3 phases of where we are here in this pre-consortium, moving into that consortium phase to develop the strategic plan that would then launch the freestanding entity of SHIP. And that was one of the other questions that we looked at. What are the plausible operating models for ShipMD? And again, we've asserted that this would be an independent nonprofit organization with a multi-stakeholder governance board. And, you know, just harkening back to what John just said, a sustainable and dedicated funding source. And we explored what some of those plausible funding sources would be that would be necessary to, again, across those 3 phases, funding sources for each of those phases that would be necessary to move this process forward, and examine some other examples of consortia and initiatives like this that relied on a blend of public and private grants. Often those public grants require a legislative mandate. The private grants, in this case, you know, would be able to draw on the participation of various foundations and those that are focused on pediatric health initiatives, broadly speaking, but medical devices and those specific disease indications most impacted there. And of course, industry participation in this, both as the ShipMD freestanding entity would be launched and on an ongoing basis as innovators participated in the program and, you know, took advantage of the services that we've described and all of the benefits and potential efficiencies and costs and time for these critical devices to get to patients. So we feel that there's, you know, real value in that, and the finance workstream again put forward that, you know, this ShipMD would be a strong catalyst for investment in pediatric medical devices, providing those operational efficiencies, that access to subject matter experts and a knowledge base for innovators to be able to really accelerate that process of development and testing and clinical trials and moving through a more consistent and known regulatory and reimbursement pathway. All of that provides great value to multiple organizations and players in this ecosystem. And so on that note, we did, as a finance workstream, consider what are some of the critical financial issues for the consortium to address in this next phase. To move into that consortium phase, we would recommend that they look at the overarching value proposition for all of the different players in the ecosystem, of course, the innovators, but also hospitals, the payers, FDA, and other participants in this initiative, and align that value proposition for each of those stakeholders against the funding sources that would be required to move ShipMD through the consortium to the freestanding entity. And I think a few of the other questions that we talked about in the finance workstream really, and were highlighted here by the participants in this workshop over the past 3 days, really focused around some of the needs and available resources or limited resources of the very early stage innovators and companies coming into this process, and ensuring that they would be able to participate in this, that those funding requirements and costs would be appropriately aligned with the incentives and benefits for participating. And again, not only just for the innovators, but also for the hospitals and the other stakeholders, the clinical community there as well. So those were the key issues that we addressed. And I think, we see this, again, as a great opportunity to catalyze additional investment in pediatric medical devices, and that ShipMD would play a strong facilitating role in connecting investors and capital with innovators, and that there, is the eventuality down the road of a more formal, investment activity as a sidebar and, a separate firewalled entity from ShipMD. It would really drive investment into this space. So those are some of the considerations that we thought we looked at, and we appreciated all the feedback and questions we received over the past few days. And with that, I'll hand it over to Eric Chen for the regulatory workstream.
Great, thanks for that. So I'd like to recognize, the work that my colleagues on the regulatory workstream, as well as co-chair Amar Retrick from Medtronic, as well as the CPAC organization and others who are involved in making this workshop possible, folks from hospitals, folks from FDA, AdvaMed, audience folks. We appreciate your involvement today, because of the fact that, your involvement in this is very, very helpful for us as we continue to explore opportunities on how to make this process happen. So the regulatory workstream was tasked to explore opportunities to address regulatory needs by refining the current regulatory review process as it relates to medical devices, and considering new regulatory options for further developing and assisting with pediatric medical devices. Specifically, we were interested in trying to identify opportunities to de-risk the pediatric medical device ecosystem and to facilitate medical device approval. We explored the possibility of expanding some of the current regulatory programs at CDRH, as well as to explore opportunities of enhancing the tools for optimizing certain programs, such as breakthrough device designation. There was discussion as to whether we could perhaps create a new pediatric breakthrough device program, or modify the current program as it relates to pediatric medical devices, as well as consider opportunities of paralleling the current reimbursement framework that comes with breakthrough device designation as it relates to our Medicare patient population. We explored the use of ShipMD to provide expertise when it comes to clinical trial design, as well as the assistance of ShipMD champions to be able to help with the benefit risk profile as it relates to pediatric medical devices. Additionally, we also discussed the benefit of a single IRB process within the ShipMD network to speed up the process of recruitment of patients, as well as perhaps reducing the cost of clinical trials. We proposed that there be a creation of FDA liaisons within CDRH that could help promote better collaboration between innovators, FDA, ShipMD, to help demystify, the FDA review process. We believe that these liaisons can facilitate regulatory interactions and discussions between all stakeholders. And lastly, we talked about the proposal to create a one-stop shop resource portal that would be able to contain information related to pediatric guidances, pediatric medical device strategies, and be able to have a regulatory tool in a single location instead of having to search for it within certain websites. So at the end of the day, we believe that optimizing the regulatory review process within ShipMD, will allow us to be innovative in the development as well as the enhancement of pediatric medical devices. We look forward to pursuing a solution for addressing the unmet needs of pediatric patients. We look forward to working with all of you. And with that said, I'll turn it back over to Kanwal Ji to continue with our program today.